And I chair the school building committee for this potential new school. We have a presentation here for you tonight. You won't really hear much more from me. Dr. Goff, the superintendent of schools, Brian Jarvis, our project manager, will be doing the presentation. We also have Chris Blesson, the architect, representative of TAPE Architects is here. So they've got a presentation, and we welcome questions. What we'd like is, if you have any questions or comments, if you can wait until after the presentation and line up here, kind of like town meeting, and we'll get to all of your questions and comments as best we can. With no further ado, though, I'm going to turn it over to Dr. Goff.
Thank you. I'm going to take this off so you can hear me. Hopefully everybody can hear me okay. So thank you for coming. I'm Dr. Bridget Goff, Superintendent of the Walpole Public Schools. Just want to tonight just talk about where we've been, where we are right now, and where we're going. So just before we start, I just want to talk a little bit about the Massachusetts School Building Authority, where we talked about the MSBA. They really strive to work with the local communities to create affordable, sustainable, and energy efficient schools across Massachusetts. The MSBA has dedicated a revenue stream of 1 penny of the state's 6.25% sales tax, and they collaborate with municipalities to equitably invest in finding the right size, most fiscally responsible, and educationally appropriate solutions to create what they call a safe, sound, and sustainable learning environment. By meeting all of their requirements, Walpole is eligible to receive $37 million of state funding, and the process is dictated by the MSBA. I also wanted to bring to your attention that this is really a team effort of the Walpole Middle School project team, and it is comprised of the Walpole School Building Committee, and you can see here that we have public school representatives on here. You met Mark Green tonight, who is our School Building Committee chair. We have school committee members. Also, we have school administrators, Mike Frisha, the school business administrator, and then also Bird Middle School principal. We have town representatives as well. We have members of the finance committee, select board, our town administration, our building superintendent, and then also members of our planning board. With community representatives as well as Compass project team, and you'll see Brian Jarvis is sitting to my left. He has worked on many projects in the district or in the town, and I'll talk about that in a minute. TAPE Architects, and then also New Vista Design. David Stevens, what he was instrumental is creating our visioning statements with in our sessions, not only with the school department, but also our community as well. A little bit about how we got here. Walpole Public Schools contracted the McGuire Group to provide this comprehensive master planning study to address the facility needs of the school. And the report also identified not only Bird, but Johnson Middle School as having major deficiencies. In 2016, you can see that we had a secondary school space studies option, and that was conducted by DRA Associates. Also in 2016, Walpole applied to the MSBA program with our first, is what we call a statement of interest. And you could see that in 2018, we were invited into the eligibility period. We were very fortunate. There were 70 statement of interest at that time that were submitted to the state. 12 were accepted into the eligibility program, and only three were middle schools. We were one of those three. So Bird was invited into the eligibility process or eligibility period, but also MSBA recognized that there were needs at both middle schools and approved a study for both enrollment, so a possible consolidation. The town also approved $1.5 million for this feasibility study, and in 2019 we were one of 4 schools invited into the feasibility invitation and a feasibility study agreement with the MSBA. And what that does is these feasibility studies carefully examine the potential solution of the issues that were identified at the school facilities and really helped us to develop the most cost-effective plan to address these issues. You can see here in 2020, 2021, we entered both the feasibility and the schematic design timeline. In 2020, we had our project management team Compass approval, our TAPE, our designer selection, and we submitted the preliminary design program. Both in 2020 and 2021, we were involved in the schematic design process, and a report was submitted in July and approved in front of the MSBA board on August 25th. We've had multiple community forums along the way. And we are fortunate to work with both TAPE and Compass. Compass worked, has worked with the town on the library, the fire department, the council on aging, and they're well known to finish on time and under budget. This just shows you all the work that has been done, that it's a very comprehensive and detailed process of all the deliverables that MSBA requires us to achieve. All of these milestones, from the education program to a space study, to the evaluation of different scenarios, the preferred solution, 30% through of the schematic design, and then all of the final design program, from traffic studies to environmental assessments, construction cost estimate, and the maximum MSBA reimbursement, which Brian is going to talk about. As part of one of the deliverables, we were required through the MSBA to establish this comprehensive and thoughtful education program that articulates the educational goals and the needs of the district. It's a very comprehensive document. It was about 65 pages. And it also not only talks about the goals and the needs of the district, but it provides for future flexibility to adapt to the changes in programming or teaching methodologies over the useful life of the school. Walpole Middle School is committed to educating students in an inclusive environment where students have equitable opportunities and access to resources to learn and thrive. Teaming, you'll find out, is at the heart of the middle school philosophy. And the design of a combined middle school must promote an environment where our students, our staff, our families, and our community members can come together and build these collaborative partnerships. You'll see some of these key components when we talk about some renderings in a second. So in terms of the enrollment decision, at the meeting in December 2020, the school committee voted unanimously to pursue a combined middle school enrollment. 905 students for this project. And why a combined middle school? Well, it was determined that you have equitable access for combined enrollment. Each student will receive the resources and educational opportunities to learn and thrive. All students benefit, as we know, from a combined middle school in terms of resources, general education, and special education program. There's really improved and more equitable access to student services. And as you know, we're committed to providing these educational experiences for children with disabilities in our least restrictive environment. So having all middle schools and all in-district programs in one building really maximizes our service, ensures greater flexibility with regard to service delivery, one community, one school. Teaming, I mentioned that earlier. In order for students to really feel and truly feel this sense of belonging and connection and gain the social and emotional and academic benefits, we believe that students must be grouped in these clearly defined teams, which a combined middle school would allow us to create. You also have improved school programming and related arts offerings. So a combined middle school allows us to utilize our staff in the more robust, related arts curriculum, and offers after-school enrichment programs that we could not run due to enrollment. And then finally, and this is also important, a combined schools is significantly more cost-effective than building separate projects. If it's separate, it could take up to 8 or more years to complete a second project with MSBA funding. In terms of enrollment, some people have asked, how did you get to the 905? How did you come up with that? Really, as part of the deliverables, we have to submit an MSBA enrollment projection application, and that includes a significant amount of data. They require data by the district, data by the Department of Elementary and Secondary Education, data provided by the Massachusetts Department of Public Health, and so we really worked in conjunction with the town administration. It's a comprehensive report that includes not only also the past 10 years of enrollment, K through 12. We look at building permits, past and projected, residential developments, housing sales, collaboratives, and out-of-district students, private schools, births, baseline projections. So you can see all of that went into the enrollment decision. Just going to show you some renderings before I turn it over to Brian. You can see here that the site plan is 162,193 square feet with 45 classrooms. You're looking at 5 classrooms per team and 3 teams per grade, and I'll show you how it's broken out. So it really, again, is creating neighborhoods and a sense of community. There's a separated car, bus circulation loop, overhead event parking, overflow parking, and a new entrance to East Street. That's just one of the aerial view renderings. So here are the schematic floor plans. So I mentioned grade level neighborhoods. Grade level neighborhoods in the education plan and in our visioning statements were mentioned 79 times, and teaming, it was mentioned almost 140 times. So you can see that neighborhoods really equate to this building geography that it drives our core academic spaces. It's organized, as I mentioned, by 3 grade level teams, 3 teams per grade, and support the school's team-based approach to curriculum delivery. Contains a variety of flexible spaces, so you can see special education programs, academic support rooms. They're all this inherent part in our neighborhood. The neighborhoods will also contain 4 general education classrooms, a dedicated science classroom, and what we call a STEAM space, science, technology, engineering, the arts, and math, to facilitate inquiry, presentation, and project-based learning, really having those authentic real-world experiences and collaboration. So you see why that really drives the mission. Neighborhoods should have this feeling of home, and that they're really a comfortable and safe sending message to students that they are part of a small learning community, which in turn is connected to the fabric of a larger school. This building maximizes and enables greater flexibility with regard to the delivery of all services, and it builds a stronger learning environment. We have equitable access to 21st century learning environments and programming, so 100% of the students will benefit from new resources. That there will be a technology literacy and computer science lab, and a multimedia and video production lab, for example. So these labs, in essence, bring interactive and immersive experiences through virtual reality platforms. They are able to learn skills and apply them as a team to address these unique design challenges, and then also create these authentic solutions. So these labs, such as being able to study solar energy or energy conservation, really helping our next generation of environmentalists or biological science. These STEAM labs create a deeper level of research and then also demonstration. A dedicated auditorium will be able to house our large music program. Every student in the middle school takes the music, whether it's general music, band, chorus, and orchestra. One course will actually need to take place on stage, and behind the stage there'll be a much needed music classroom. Both middle schools have a robust drama program, and it will also allow for community performing arts groups and then community events and meetings. In terms of the cafeteria and kitchen, the dining space as well as the kitchen here will facilitate community outreach, accommodating off-hour school and community education and partnerships. The central kitchen and cafeteria will also be utilized to provide vocational opportunities for our special education programming. This space will help support job training and hands-on learning for our special education students. This partnership is an integral part of our inclusion program. And finally, taking 2 middle school gyms and creating 1 larger gym, and then a separate teaching station will be shared with the special education programs, since adaptive phys ed, occupational therapy, and physical therapy can have a dedicated and well-deserved space and meet all needs and allow students to integrate with their peers. And finally, the visioning sessions really expressed a strong desire to build a school that allows for community access. And this is what this building does. It provides performance venues and gathering spaces and athletic spaces that can be safely accessed by the community after school, on weekends, and during the summer months through the auditorium, the cafeteria, and the gym.
Thank you, Bridget. As Dr. Goff mentioned, my name is Brian Jarvis. I work for Compass Project Management. We're the owner's project manager for this project. I was also the owner's project manager on the fire station, police station, and council on aging buildings. Been with Compass, we've been doing school projects now for over 10 years. We did the first MSBA project, which was Norwood High School, after the reformulation of the MSBA, so we've been doing this for over 12 years. We processed over $300 million in reimbursements to local towns and cities on school projects. So we're happy to be part of Walpole. I'm also a resident. My wife is a graduate of Walpole High. My son is a graduate of Walpole High, and my second son is currently a student at Walpole High, and they both went through the Byrd Middle School. So I'll talk a little bit about the final technical aspects of the building and then get into some of the financial pieces. From a sustainability and energy efficiency perspective, we're targeting LEED Silver, which is the Leadership in Energy Environmental Design, and that encompasses a lot of different things in the LEED scorecard, but not only energy efficiency in the mechanics, but also sustainable products, access to public transportation, access to outdoor space, the distance that products are coming from, et cetera. So all that goes into a LEED scorecard, and right now we're targeting LEED Silver. We're using energy efficient systems that are targeting 20% or more efficient than the Mass Energy Code, and that's important because that qualifies us for additional reimbursement for the Mass School Building Authority, and we'll show how that affects the reimbursement rate in a little bit. And we're also partnering with Eversource and Mass Save and other local utility companies to get into the rebate and incentive programs, both pre-construction, during construction, and then post-construction once the building is operating. So there'll be one-time incentive opportunities that could offset some of the costs of these systems. The building is also targeting net zero energy ready. Some of you might be familiar with net zero energy. There are a lot of state mandates coming out. I think all public buildings are pushing to be net zero energy by 2050. And what that means is that you're not necessarily off the grid, but that means at the end of the year you have produced as much energy as the building has consumed. So net zero energy ready means that the building systems are set up to eventually be offset by a renewable energy source. And the two main drivers of that currently are photovoltaics or solar panels or geothermal wells. This building is being set up towards solar panels. It has an optimum solar orientation, as you saw in that rendering. It has highly insulated building envelope, all electric HVAC system, LED lighting, and control systems throughout the building to help maximize efficiency. As I mentioned, it's being made ready for solar panels at a future date, whether that becomes part of the project or afterwards. You know, the town might have some advantages in entering in agreements for solar panels on multiple buildings, but we'll have the structure available and the conduits within the building to get to the electric room. We'll have conduits out to the site for possible solar canopies like you see at the Aggie. So the building will be ready whenever the town is ready to make that decision. So total project budget, I know you have a summary handout from tonight, but the total project budget is $115 million. This was what was submitted to the MSBA in July. And what goes into that? So 1.5 was already approved by the town for the feasibility and schematic design phase, and that's what the project is using right now to get to this point. We entered into that agreement with the MSBA. There will be another agreement with the MSBA if the project is approved, which will be the project funding agreement. We'll talk about that in a few minutes. $3 million roughly for project management administration, so the OPM, estimates, insurance, things of that nature. Architect and engineering is another 8.3. Construction cost overall is 92.6, but I should point out that 86% of that is roughly directly into the trades or the contractor cost. We're also carrying a contractor contingency because this is a CM at risk project of about 1.8 million. And we're also carrying market escalation. We've done our best to escalate the current costs of construction given the crazy market that we have right now, but we're also escalating those costs to the end of next year when this project will start putting together a final budget if it's approved. Of roughly 4.6 million is also in that 92.6. Just over $500,000 in miscellaneous costs such as utility fees, testing services, moving, furniture, fixtures, and equipment or FF&E and technologies, roughly 3 million. Owner's construction contingency, so this is what the owner would carry in their budget, so the town would carry in their budget for any change orders that might happen during construction. 5% of construction, 4.9, and then owner soft costs. So anything that's not construction related that comes up during the course of the project would come out of soft cost, 2%, roughly 1.8 to get you that 115.7. So before we go into reimbursement rate, I think there's been a lot of questions on eligible, ineligible costs related to the MSBA, and I'll go through this quickly, and we can answer more questions if you have them later. But the MSBA, while they provide the funding mechanism in the process, and they agree to reimburse you a percentage of eligible costs, they do have categories of costs that are deemed ineligible in all projects. It's just not Walpole. Every town and every project goes through this. And when you come out of the gate with the MSBA, you know that there are going to be things on your project, kind of regardless of what you do, are going to be deemed ineligible by the MSBA. And this is a way that they help manage their budgets and help level the playing field across districts between urban schools, rural schools, wealthy towns, and towns that need more assistance. Three major ways that they deem things to be ineligible: categorically ineligible, meaning they just don't pay for it regardless of what you're doing. Basically, three examples of that: it's not core to your educational program. You want to go build a movie theater because you think it's cool, they're not going to reimburse you for a movie theater. They're not going to reimburse you for swimming pools. Costs are not part of the permanent building or ground. So you destroy a field in building your school and you want to build a field someplace else in town, they're not going to reimburse that. They're not going to reimburse you any temporary type facilities that you put on your site, and anything beyond the scope of the project. So again, anything you want to develop off-site related to the project, sometimes traffic signalization, 3 intersections away from the school, something like that, they won't reimburse. Costs that exceed their caps. They also set caps on particular costs. They have caps on how much you pay the OPM, how much you pay the architect, how much you spend in site, and a general construction dollar per square foot cost, which we'll talk about later. Once project costs exceed that, they cap that, and anything above that cost they deem to be ineligible. Again, a way to level the playing field across towns. And then costs for spaces that exceed their guidelines. So they work with the Department of Education, come up with a classroom should be this big, 850 square feet to 1,050 square feet. If you want 2,000 square foot classrooms, you can build them, but they're going to cap you at 950 and deem that extra square footage ineligible. That's one example of square footage costs that exceed the guidelines. Some examples we talked about: categorically ineligible, land acquisition, legal fees, swing space. You want to renovate your school and you have to bring in temporary classrooms. Temporary classrooms are ineligible. Financing costs, asbestos floor tiles when you get into construction, they just deem that to be ineligible in every project. And for an elementary school or middle school, an auditorium is deemed category ineligible. They don't believe that an auditorium is part of a middle school program. A lot of districts disagree with that because of their performing arts programs, and they opt to put the auditorium in there. Walpole has decided to do that. Synthetic turf. A lot of schools say, hey, we want synthetic turf on our fields, get a lot more wear and play out of it. They'll give you a grass field, but the synthetic will be ineligible. Costs exceeding caps, some of the examples: total soft costs, so your architects, OPMs, other stuff exceeding 20%, OPM above 3.5, architect above 10. The big one is building costs exceeding $360 per square foot. This was just increased, and we'll show this in a little bit. This used to be $333 until this June, so Walpole is actually one of the first schools to get the upped cap here, which is a good thing. Site costs over 8%, and then they cap furniture and technology per student. And then also change orders. They continue to audit the project all the way through construction, and they will reimburse up to 1% of construction change orders, and anything over that 1%, even if it's an eligible type thing, it's no longer eligible if it's a change order. Doesn't mean you can't do it, they just won't reimburse it. And then items where categories where your spaces might exceed a square foot guideline. So one of the things we did here in Walpole is by the teaming structure actually came up with more classrooms needed to support the teams than what they would typically assign for the enrollment. However, that is the way that Walpole and a lot of districts run middle schools. And so what they do is when they review your educational program, if your educational program supports how you want to set up your school and the spaces that you want, they will consider that and make a judgment call. They found all the classroom spaces in Walpole to be eligible. That was a big win for Walpole. The third, gym space. So they basically give you a gym of a certain square footage for a middle school. Any additional square footage over that could be deemed ineligible, but because this is supported by Walpole's educational program, it was deemed eligible by the MSBA. The central kitchen was deemed eligible because we didn't take up any more square footage than the cafeteria kitchen per their guidelines, in their guidelines. And then the way that the reimbursement rate works is that they'll give you a stated reimbursement rate to start. So we're going to give you a certain percentage of reimbursement to start the project, and that'll be for eligible costs only, and we can talk more about that later, and that's what we just went through. Not all project costs are considered eligible, like we just talked about, but the effective reimbursement rate that the town actually gets back is always going to be less than what they tell you in the beginning of the job because of these ineligible costs. So if it's a $100 million project going in, they say your reimbursement rate is going to be 50. By the time they take out these ineligible costs, some of them are out of your control, they might only be taking 50% of $70 million. So obviously your received reimbursement is going to be less. Walpole started at 48% with the MSBA, and they've earned 3.5 for in additional incentives to get up to a percentage of 52%. So basically you take the project costs, you take out the ineligible costs, ineligible soft costs, you're left with eligible costs. Then once those eligible costs are determined, then they apply that percentage, the 52% against that, and come up with what they call their estimated maximum grant. In Walpole case is $37 million. And then the leftover amount on the project is what the town would have to eventually bond. So just to summarize that for Walpole, $150 million for the project. That's approved by the MSBA. That includes the auditorium, the central kitchen, third gym space, and CM at risk delivery method. The stated rate that Walpole is going to receive is 52.22 of eligible costs. That includes the additional 3.54% incentives. We're projecting that Walpole is going to realize from the MSBA about 32%, and the scope and budget agreement that they sent to the town, which will be voted on at town meeting, says they will fund up to $37.9 million in eligible costs. All of that is susceptible to their audit as you move through the project, but it's going to be in the $37 million neighborhood at the end of the day. That leaves the town to fund the remaining portion of the 115, which is roughly $78 million. However, the way the MSBA process works is that the town must approve that total project budget before moving out of schematic design into design. So they make you approve the 115, even though at the end of the day, you're really only going to bond about $78 million. But they make you approve it, finance it, and then you actually submit the reimbursements as you move through design and construction. So every month, currently, we're submitting invoices every month, and they're sending back 48% of those costs back to the district. They'll do that all the way through design, all the way to the end of the project until there's about 5% left to give back, and then they'll do a final audit, and the town will get that 5% back at the end. So you borrow it, you kind of approve it all at once. The town can borrow it however it wants to borrow it. It gets reimbursed all along the way, and then they finance it at the end. So how does Walpole compare to some other MSBA projects? So this is a little bit tough to see, but you get the general idea. All the way to the left is 2009. The first orange dot is Norwood High School. That was built at about $200 per square foot. The orange line is the average cost of construction for schools since then, and you can see where that has gone. It's gone nowhere but up. The orange dots that are filled in are projects that actually were built, so they actually had an estimate, they actually went into construction, and that's where the cost of construction are. The dashed orange line is the approximate average cost, square foot, dollars per square foot of school construction currently. And the blue boxes, the big blue rectangles, you can barely see them here, but to the right, that's the cluster of projects that are currently in the MSBA pipeline in design. So all the blue box represent different estimates during design for these towns. Walpole at $571 per square foot construction cost is just below the average cost of a school in the MSBA pipeline. And it should be noted that the other projects around Walpole, the other blue dots and crosses, are elementary schools for the most part. There are only a handful of middle schools currently in the project. The rest are elementary school and high schools. High schools are typically more expensive than middle schools. Middle schools more expensive than elementary schools simply because different size spaces, different types of equipment, et cetera. So Walpole is actually in a fairly cost-effective position with the MSBA as far as their project goes. The other important line here to notice is the green line at the bottom of the page. That is what the MSBA caps their reimbursement at for construction costs. It used to be $333 for the last 5 years, and they just upped it this June to $360. So what this means is that if you design a school that's $500 a square foot, the MSBA says we will give you $360 per square foot towards that building. The additional $140 is ineligible. So they take that right off the top of your project. No matter what school you are, no matter what town you are, the farther away you are from that line, the more comes off the top of your project. So the projects above that orange line, it's $600 something per square foot. They're taking $300 per square foot off of their budget before the MSBA starts to look at it as what's eligible or not eligible. So the goal is to design as cost-effective project as you can and stay as close to that as you can. Unfortunately, The MSBA is not saying that you can actually build a project for $360. That's what they're going to give you. The market dictates that, and you can see where the orange line is by what the market is dictating currently and what has it been dictating for the last 10 years. Just to put that into a graph or into a chart perspective. So these are all most of the projects have gone through the MSBA pipeline in the last 2 years. The source, the third or fourth column from the left, is when they went to the MSBA board. And basically, most of them that you see project phase SD, schematic design, this was the project that was brought to those town meetings and what those towns had to approve. For the MSBA project, they make you approve it at the schematic design phase, 30% in. It's a very diligent process, but they make you get all your numbers as right as you can get them, and they make you approve it. They don't want the project to move forward and spend another $8–10 million in design, then to have the town shoot it down. They want to protect their investment, they want the town to protect their design money, and they make you do it this schematic design phase. So this is a comparable look at what these towns are looking at when they voted on their project. And you can see that Walpole is really in the middle of the pack, and most of the schools on this list are elementary school projects. The items in green are the schools that are also net zero ready that we could find information on. And this is basically they're building to the net zero energy ready or net zero energy schools to meet some of these upcoming mandates. And when you look at the cost of what those schools are being proposed at, a lot of the elementary schools, a lot of in our neighboring towns in Metro West, they're up in the mid $600 to $694 a square foot in one of the Wellesley projects. Walpole is fairly cost effective at $571, and actually closer to the bottom handful of schools than they are to even the schools slightly above them. The other thing to note is that a lot of those schools were approved in the pipeline almost 2 years ago and currently in construction. Those costs per square foot are actually what they built the projects for 2 years ago. So you can see where construction costs are going from even just 2 years ago. They're jumping from the mid to low fives to the mid to upper sixes at this point, just a year and a half removed from where some of those projects are. So what does that mean to the taxpayer? So when you take that 115 and you take the 37 million from the MSBA reimbursement, you're left with about 78 million that the town is going to have to bond. And the timing of all that, there's a lot of options that the town will have, but we tried to put together a conservative estimate of what that might look like to the taxpayer. $78 million right now, assuming a 3.5% rate, which we feel is conservative. A lot of towns are moving theirs more towards 2 on a 30-year term. Roughly equates to $438 on average to the average assessed home at $556,000. So obviously, home's a little more expensive, that's a little higher. Home's a little less expensive, that's a little bit lower. And again, we think that that's a fairly conservative estimate at this point. And there's a lot of variations in there, and we can answer some questions on that. There are programs available at the town. Obviously, we're cognizant of the fact there's folks on fixed incomes that might have hardships, et cetera. There's programs available through the town's assessor's office to help mitigate that. But again, the charge of the committee was to bring the most cost-effective solution possible, and this is what it translates into. How does that tax impact compare to some of our immediate neighbors? Westwood and Medfield are both doing elementary school projects, and again, a lot of variables, the amount of commercial tax that they have available to themselves, the amount of reimbursement that's coming back from the MSBA varies. Westwood, for example, they're building an elementary school, $86 million total project. Their MSBA reimbursement to begin with was 39. They're projecting to actually receive 21% from the MSBA. Their tax impact is roughly $591 for 30 years at 4%. They've since lowered that this week to 2%, but it's still higher than Walpole's 438. Medfield, Dale Elementary School. Medfield has almost no commercial tax base. They're looking to build an elementary school. The price is $82 million. Again, they started with a reimbursement from the MSBA at about 39%. They're projecting to realize about 23%. Their tax impact is roughly $900 for the average assessed value. They're carrying 30 years at 3.5. Same what Walpole's assessed. The same that Walpole is estimating at this point. So next steps. So where do we go from here? We got approved by the MSBA at August 25th board meeting. They now issued a scope and budget agreement, which is a contract with the town, which does exactly that. It memorializes the scope of the project, the budget for that project. That's one of the documents that would get executed pending an approved project. They also issue a project funding agreement. This will be the next contract with all the financials. So we did the 1.5 million feasibility study agreement back in 2018. This will be the project funding agreement for the remaining $113.5 million, so to speak, the full budget. That will get amended once the construction numbers are finalized. So once the bids are received and once the construction budget is finalized, you'll do what's called a PFA amendment, but that happens on every project. But those are the two documents that are currently on the town's table that will get presented at town meeting, and if approved, will get executed. And once those are executed, again, assuming an approved project, the town could begin the design process and begin that monthly reimbursement request to the MSBA to start recouping some of those costs back at the 52% clip. There's also been a couple questions about the town meeting process. Why not wait and get an actual bid prior to town meeting? So the MSBA's process, I explained before, requires that you go to town meeting, authorize the project, and authorize the project funding at the end of schematic design to help protect their investment and the town's investment. They want the town to do their due diligence and approve the project at the end of schematic design before they spend the 8 to 10% on design costs, only to get up to a town meeting and potentially have the project fail. So they want you to do that before you spend any more money. As part of that process, the MSBA has agreed to reimburse Walpole almost $40 million, a maximum of up to 37.9. If you want to go without the MSBA, you can definitely do that on a school project, but the MSBA will not participate. So then Walpole would be funding the $115 million without MSBA participation. There are stories out there, and we can answer those questions later, where districts have done that. They've failed their project. They've come back. It's going to be cheaper. They didn't get the MSBA involved. They've almost doubled town shares. There's a lot of stories out there like that. We can give you more specific examples. What happens if the project is not approved? So what happens if the project fails? Basically, the town has 10 days from town meeting if it fails to come back to the MSBA and say, this is what the votes were, this is why it failed, and this is what we think we can do to actually approve the project. Typically, you can't fix that in 10 days. Typically, they want to design a different school, they want it to be smaller, they want it to be someplace else. You're not going to be able to fix that. And most likely, MSBA just closes the project and says, Walpole's closed. If you want to do it again, you have to start all over again. And we'll just note that we're currently 3 years, if not more, because they had two statements of interest rejected prior to the one that was accepted. We're 3 years and $1.5 million into the process right now with the MSBA. So if it were to fail at town meeting or the ballot, and you wanted to do it again, you'd have to submit a statement of interest, go through the whole process of bringing on an OPM again. Even if it was us, you'd have to re-solicit, you have to bring on the same architect and go through the same process with the MSBA 3 years long to get back to this point again, with costs having escalated all the way along the way. So that's one of the downfalls, if it does fail, something to think about. But the MSBA does make you start over. If it passes, what does the project timeline look like? Full design would begin immediately in November through the fall of next year. Right now, we're targeting an early construction package. This project is going construction manager at risk, which gives us some flexibility to start some construction ahead of having a completed design. And the intent would be to do an enabling phase during next summer when school is out to get the site ready for construction, temporary roads, temporary parking lots, put up fences, get temporary drop-off lanes, things of that nature set up before school comes back in, with full construction starting late fall towards the winter of 2022. Overall construction, including enabling and demolition, about 32 months, and 3 phases: an enabling phase, a new build phase, and a demo phase. Start the project, build the new building, move Bird in, move Johnson in, and then tear down Bird and finish the parking lots in the site. The new building would be open in fall of 2024. I think that's current kindergarten first graders would be the first 6th graders to go through it. Project would be complete, so demolition of Bird, finish the parking lot and site by early 2025. And then that final reimbursement process with the MSBA. The MSBA takes about a year to do the final reimbursement process. They require a couple checkups at the 10-month after you've moved in. You have to finish all your lead requirements, close out all the financials, and then they give the 5% back to the town. It's a much better process than it used to be. Before they reformed as the MSBA, that process could take years, if not multiple years, to get that final 5%. That's just a timeline showing that overlap of potentially starting construction early, again with school opening, and then demoing the building and finishing up the site. And just more information. We're here tonight. We're going to do another forum, at least one more forum at the Bird Middle School on October 19th in prep of town meeting. Town meeting's on the 23rd, and then the ballot vote will be on the 2nd. And the project does require both votes. It requires approval at town meeting, and if approved, it does require approval at the ballot in order to move forward. If you need more information, we do have a project website. It's a subpage on the school's homepage. All the information is there, MSBA documents, the history, the statements of interest, frequently asked questions, all the presentations to the building committee, school committee along the way, a lot of renderings and pictures, some summary slides about the costs and things we just talked through, a video of the Bird Middle School if you've never been through there. Also look at the MSBA's website. They have a lot of great information. You can see their process. You can see the other communities that are going through their process. If you actually click on and get your way to their board meetings, you can actually go see every project that's been approved by the MSBA, the current state that we're in, for the last 10 years and what those projects look like, the costs, the reimbursement rates, everything. If you have a question, that's the email to the project team. All of us will receive that email and we'll get back to you with an answer as soon as we can. And with that, we'll open it up to questions. Hopefully we've answered some of them in advance. And then if you want to raise your hand and come down to the mic, you can answer a question. And we just ask if you can keep a comment or question to under a minute so we can try to get everybody through tonight. That'd be great.
Yeah, my name is Steve Hearn. I've got 3 quick questions. One of them was looking at the reimbursement rates. And I'm looking at Medfield, which is about 76%. Westwood comes in at about 80%, and yet Walpole is coming in at about 33%. I know that was touched on a little bit, but I think that really has to be addressed. Why are we getting so little? Have we over-designed? Have we put too much into the program?
No, so what this means is that Walpole, the MSBA said at the beginning of the project, Walpole would get 48%. They bumped it up to 52%. So per this slide here. And what we're saying is at the end of the day, when you actually go through the MSBA project, and you take out ineligible costs and the MSBA does their assessment, you're really going to realize about 32% of the total project, not the 55. That's just the MSBA's process. So 32% of the 115 is roughly 37 million is what you're going to get from the MSBA. Westwood started at 39. They're only getting 21% reimbursement from the MSBA. They're getting less. Same thing with Medfield. They started at 39 and they're only going to get 23. So Walpole's going to get 32. They're getting 21 and 23. Comparatively.
Okay, thank you for that clarification. Yep. Another question is, there's a 2-week period roughly between the town meeting and when the citizens get to vote on this. My comment is I find that's a pretty short time period to get news out there, to get some debate about it. So I don't think the citizens are left in a good position as far as making a decision. And the third comment is, what happens if at town meeting people approve the project, and remember, there's no hard final cost at that point. And then the costs come in, and the costs are much higher. Can the project be closed out, or are the citizens committed to building something for costs they don't know?
So the project is going to be authorized for the $115 million budget. So the entire next year through design will be spent on keeping that project on budget to the best of their ability. We, as a CM at risk project, we do have the advantage of working with the contractor during design, having the contractor do estimates versus kind of leaving it to a bid environment where you have no control over that. That being said, oftentimes during that process, and it happens on just about every project, is that you go through cost management, value engineering, whatever you want to consider to keep that project on budget. If for some reason that you do get to the end of the project and it's over budget, it's $116 million, then yes, in theory, that $1 million would be the additional town share. The MSBA will reimburse up to the 37.9. If the project goes over the budget, the MSBA does not up their reimbursement amount. If the project comes in under and you save $10 million, the MSBA lowers the reimbursement amount, It's just the way that it is with the MSBA.
Okay, so the number you just mentioned was about $1 million of an overrun. Now, you've got, put up a spreadsheet showing many different towns.
Yep.
How would the overruns in those towns, or do those all come in on budget?
I'd have to look that up individually. I mean, I think most of them, in our experience, the ones that we've worked on have all come in on or under budget. We're finishing up Natick Middle School at this point right now. That came in about $7 million under budget. And the thing to note is the town is approving 115 million, and there are some contingencies built into this. There's an escalation factor, so obviously prices could stabilize. It could come in under budget. You might not spend all of your contingencies. Typically, we do not spend all of our contingencies on these projects, but you want to have them there. That becomes money that the town therefore doesn't need to borrow. So at the end of the day, the 78 million could be much lower than the 78 million. I mean, there's always a chance that it could come in higher, but in our experience, we've had pretty good track record of not having them come in higher.
So we've got a market escalation until the fall of 2022.
That's when we anticipate having a final guaranteed maximum price from the contractor. So by that end of that year, we'd have a guaranteed price for the project.
Will the contractor's contract include escalation clauses?
Will the contractors include escalation costs? Typically, they're not allowed to charge for increased costs once they sign the contract.
If they can demonstrate on a public project that concrete costs this now instead of this, it's a legitimate cost.
Yeah, we see that a lot on our projects, and we go through that process, but a lot of times it's very difficult to pay that. They typically don't get paid.
Okay, I'm familiar with some construction costs
Yep.
now, and supplies are not going down in price. But I thank you for your comments,
Yep.
appreciate it.
Brian, can you explain the contingency for the CM construction manager, like $1.8 million contingency?
So explain the $1.8 million contingency. So this is on a CM at risk project. They put together what's called a guaranteed maximum price. So the benefit of having a contractor on board during the design phase is to help put together the project cost for the construction. They're estimating it. They're looking at cost of material. They're looking at cost of subcontractors, and they're coming up with what they call a guaranteed maximum price. And the risk from a CM at risk terminology is that the contractor says, this is what the project is going to cost. We guarantee it. If anything goes over this total amount that isn't a result of a change order, meaning we change something or something's different than what they bid on, then they're at risk for paying that out of their fee. So they basically, we know their overhead and profit going in, unlike a bid environment where we don't necessarily know that. We know what their overhead and profit is, we know what their fee is, and we know what they're carrying for construction contingency, and we negotiate all of those values before we agree upon a guaranteed maximum price. The contingency is for, they make mistakes too when they're looking at things. Hey, we missed this in the design, we should have carried an extra how many square feet of this, or we thought we could buy the landscape sub for 500,000 and he came in at 550,000. They can use 50,000 out of their contingency, which is in their GMP, their guaranteed maximum price, and complete that work without coming back to the owner and using the owner's budget like a typical change order environment. So basically that CM contingency is for the CM to manage some of the things that happen along the way that they should have been, that they're responsible for, so that everything doesn't result in a change order coming back to the owner. In the process, the way that process works is, as the OPM or as the project manager, we would still review their request to use that contingency, even though it's technically inside their contract value. We would review it like a change order and still approve it. So the building committee would be approving whatever they use out of their GMP contingency, and just like a building committee would approve if they wanted a change order from the owner. Does that answer your question? That was a discussion. So the question is, the two main delivery methods for construction is design, bid, build. So basically you design it, you bid it, come back with a hard number, lump sum, and then you build it. So you open up your bids on bid day, and that's the number that you get. You don't know what that number is going to look like. It's your best guess. Construction manager at risk is where you bring in a construction management firm to work with the team along the way. They do come with some premiums. They charge you a pre-construction services fee, in this case about $200,000, but that's for their team to be working with the design team and the town's team during the design phase. And there are some premiums that are associated with that. A lot of time, one of the premiums is that they carry this GMP contingency. Again, they have it if they need it. If they don't use it, typically it comes back to the town. So a lot of times there's clauses in their contract where once you get to a certain point of construction, a certain percentage of that comes back to the town. One of the advantages or perceived advantages of CM at risk is that they're looking at the design document as you putting them together, hoping to eliminate change orders that you might have on a design bid build project. So the trade-off is that you're putting a contingency in their contract, paying them for some of their services, and then potentially lowering your change orders on the other end. They do have slightly more overhead sometimes on their projects because they typically staff the projects with a little bit more people than a design bid build contractor. So that can raise the cost slightly. One of the advantages of it, though, is that you actually have the flexibility to do some of these early release packages, as we talked about. I think I have an example. Yeah, so this is what's in the current project. So you have the ability to do some of the packages early because they're on board during the design phase. So where the timing of the project is critical, where you're trying to get something done maybe on the school schedule. If it was a design bid build, we wouldn't be able to bid this to the winter of next year. So if we wanted to do some enabling phase, now we're in the winter, schools in session, things of that nature. So from a strategy perspective, the building committee thought it was advantageous to pursue CM at risk. A lot of school projects are going CM at risk these days, simply because it does give them some flexibility and it does bring the contractor in early to be part of the team and help manage costs throughout the design phase, as well as work on that guaranteed maximum price. How that compares to design bid build in our experience, again, you have an upfront fee during pre-construction, typically fairly nominal in the size of the project. General conditions mean they typically have more staff on the project, and they spell that staff out. We see every person that they're proposing to put on the project, the amount of hours, how much that person costs, whereas a design bid build contractor, they bid it and we get who they give us. And sometimes we don't even get who they say they're gonna give us. We get the second person, the third person, the fourth person, whoever it might be. Not that they all do that, but that's what happens. There's a CM fee, which is basically their overhead and profit, typically around 2%. That's negotiated. We see that, and we know what that is. It's an open book accounting system. We do not know any markups or any fee that design bid build contractors carry, and we don't know where they're trying to make their money. So a lot of times what happens with design bid build is that they obviously bid the project, they're the low bidder, they may be making money on that, they may not be making money on that. So how do they make money? They buy out less expensive subs, potential change orders. Sometimes it works out, sometimes it doesn't. So in a CM at risk project, it's all open book and the town would see every expense. The contingency, like we talked about, and then oftentimes you might get a better non-trade sub. So not your plumbers and your electricians that are bid. We still bid all of those trade contractors just like we would in a design bid build environment. But the things like landscaper or the structural steel guy or the site contractor, they have to bring those subcontractors to the town. The town has to approve them, and a lot of times they bring in quote unquote better subs that might be a little bit more expensive, but they're not low bidding or low shopping those subs that you end up having trouble with on the project. So that's kind of where the premium comes in. There's about a 5%, 6% premium in our experience to go CM at risk, but you do have the opportunity to recoup some of that through not spending their contingency amount and keeping your change orders down at the end of the day. The Natick one was design bid build, so that did come in under budget. Yeah, we have a couple projects. Ashland Elementary School.
Questions. 905 students, 30-year bond. At what point does the school become over capacity? And the second question is, where do the bird kids go when the school's being built?
So I'll take the second question first. So the project is being set up that the bird will still be in operation during construction. It's quite common. Happens in a lot of communities. We just did it in Natick. We did it in Nord High School. We've done it in Millis. Almost a large percentage of school projects.
So it's being built in the fields then?
It's being built between Bird and Washington Street. The fields
okay.
are not part of the project, right?
I see.
What ends up happening is current school sites usually end up being the best sites for
Okay.
schools, and they end up building them on the same site, and the existing school has to remain in operation.
Thank you.
Yep. first question on capacity? Yep. Okay.
So right now, it's somewhere under about 800 kids combined in the two middle schools, something over 800?
8:30.
About 830. This building will be designed for 905 with a couple of caveats. We were talking about this earlier. It's an assumption of 20 kids per class, 905 students. So what if we hit that 905 and then we have more kids than that? Well, then you have 21 per kids per class, or 22. If you had 22 kids per class, suddenly you could fit 950. So that 905, you know, again, I'm not an expert at educational design, but to me, I look at this building and I say it could theoretically fit over 905 students. I'm a high school teacher. I'm comfortable saying that you could make it work. That 905 is kind of a conservative estimate, I think, just looking at the layout and class sizes and so forth, that we would not be coming back to you in 10 years to put an addition on it. I think that's kind of where you're going.
It's a follow-up question on that. We've got a lot of buildings going on, so if a new building comes in 3 years, it's at 300 units. Do they get a, if they've missed out on paying, 2 years of this act, do they get some type of surcharge coming in from adding more kids?
So,
No.
so no,
What the 905 does encompass, though, is they've looked at building permits, apartment complexes coming in. Like, they have a formula. If an apartment complex comes in, how many one-bedroom units, how many two-bedroom, how many three? And they have a formula that says that complex will produce this many kids. The real number always comes in under their estimate for whatever reason, but that's the formula they use. If you have a subdivision that goes in with 4-bedroom homes, they're going to tell you to expect 1.8 children per house. That's always a little bit higher than the actual number, but again, it's a formula, it's predictable, and that's how the state brought it to 905. But again, 10 years from now, we don't know what the permits are going to look like, what other complexes are going to go in. I'm comfortable saying, unofficially, that it could fit 950, 960, whatever the number might be.
yeah, so the question is if housing developments come online, where they get a surcharge, convincing the first couple of years of the tax rate, the answer is no, but part of the rationale with a 30-year term is that you're extending that to the potential users of the building, right? So, folks obviously have kids that have gone in through the middle school and they don't have kids in the system anymore, and there's folks that have yet to move to town that would get the benefits of this. So the thought is that you extend that to maybe as many generations of folks that might go through that building as possible to kind of spread that out.
And
Hi.
I would like to know, how much does it cost to demolish a building, specifically that brick building adjacent to the high school? Because,
Oh, Jason, the high school. Okay.
adjacent to the Bird
Bird.
School.
Okay.
The reason I'm asking that, sir, is because that piece of real estate is worth thousands and thousands of dollars, and you want to demolish it. That costs a lot of money to demolish a perfectly good building that you don't want there because you want to save a ball field. That's my next question. Will the MSBA pay to transfer that ball field to the corner of the property, not in another section of Walpole, but to the corner over by East Street, so we can save that very expensive piece of real estate, that brick building that's adjacent to the Bird Middle School? So will they pay for that transfer of the ball field?
So the short answer is no, because as we talked about last week, is that the field work to restore the field goes in towards the site costs of the project. So the project, given the infrastructure of the building itself, is already over the site cap of the MSBA. So if you're adding additional site work, like doing a new field, even though it's on the same property, those costs go on top of the costs that you currently have, and they're ineligible.
Right, but wouldn't we save money by keeping that red brick building there now? Don't demolish it, would save money in demolishing. We would be able to use that piece of real estate, we could rent it, we could use it as daycare, artisans could use it and rent the space.
Yeah, so I think the decision to not, I think you're talking about the gym as part of the Bird Middle
That's
School.
correct, that's
So the decision not to save the gym was looked at. We looked at the add reno to Bird and also just straight renovation to Bird. And at the end of the day, it was more cost effective. You know, it's almost as expensive to renovate that building to the size that you need for 905, if not more, than to build a new building. And then obviously you'd have the additional cost of, if you kept the gym, you'd have no gym, you know, for the students while you're building it.
No, I would like to see, all right, don't keep the gym in that red brick building, okay? Because you obviously have a huge one going into the new
Yep.
school. So you could, over time, rent that and let the people who rent it renovate it and do what they want in there.
So I think, we don't know yet, but that could be the possible, one of the possible solutions for the Johnson School. So they have that building available once this project was built, that they'd have this whole building, but that's something for the town to study further.
Well, what bothers me really, sir, and I understand what you're saying, what bothers me is we're going to demolish a perfectly good building to save a baseball field, because you would have to move the parking lot over where the baseball field is. It doesn't make sense to me to demolish a perfectly good building to save a baseball field, when we just spent 12 million on Route 1A. But then I'm told, no, that's Little League. This is varsity. You can't win.
Yeah, the committee did look at options that put part of the building or all of the building on the fields, and at the end of the day, I think those options became more expensive because of the need either to replicate fields elsewhere in town or to move fields on the, again, kind of reshuffle the fields on the site. And as we talked about last week, if you move the varsity baseball field to the other side of Bird, you are not able to fit the other fields that are currently there on the site if you're using the current varsity field for any part of the project. So you lose. So from the district's perspective, they're actually losing fields.
Well, if they lose fields, so what? They have fields down on the other end of East Street, they have soccer fields. And they also have soccer fields on 1A now. So why?
I understand, but you know, that's from the district's perspective, that they think it's more advantageous to have more fields.
Doesn't make sense to me, I'm so sorry. Well, good luck. Thank you.
Thanks.
Rich Key.
Hi, Rich.
After we go forward with this, if it's approved, what happens in this building?
Yeah, the question, what happens to Johnson if this project is
We have
approved?
a significant building in terms of what it represents in cost. What's the plan for that? Usually the plan, town never has a plan for our buildings after we go through wooden construction.
Right, so part of the requirement is the MSBA is that the town puts a plan together, so I know that, you know, if the project were to be approved, there's discussion that they will be studying of what the best use of this building is, whether that's, you know, keeping it, selling it, whatever it might be, but they will be putting together a plan.
That
Mark?
is a requirement through the MSBA.
So there would have to be a plan, but interestingly enough, the buildings technically belong to the select board. So that would be a decision for the select board, not for the school board. But they would have to come up with a plan. Right, yeah, that's part of the process.
Yeah, that'll happen in parallel with the design of the new building. I don't think we'll know that by November. We'll know that next year. Yep. I'm sorry, I didn't hear that last question.
So I probably guess no, because you can't guarantee, for instance, if we're gonna look for tenants, like if daycares for rent or something like that, there'd be no guarantee that we have them lined up by November. But the possibilities would begin to be floated by then.
We would get a task force together of, you know, hopefully the town would invite the school department, to be able to with community members. And that's part of the MSBA process. They have required that you have to discuss and have a plan, and they actually have a process of a timeline. They want you to do this and then be able to, but that's part of the process of asking us to be able to deliver that of what our options are with this building.
Shouldn't that plan parallel for 3 years before you can have a plan for the school? Shouldn't that be going concurrent?
It was part,
That's the question.
Yep.
so part of the 3 years, the last year, so to speak, has really been looking at the options. So it wasn't until February, it wasn't until March that the option was to build a new school. So there was all the options of potentially only doing a bird school, only renovating the bird, maybe building a new school at Johnson. So there's a bunch of moving options, and then part of the MSBA's requirement is that you actually start to formulate the plan of what you might do if there's a building that's left over that you're not going to be utilizing. So the town has started those initial steps, and we'll have to provide more information, and we don't have it at this point. So there has been some initial discussions about it.
I speak from here, I speak loudly.
Sure.
Okay. So we're being asked to approve something, but we don't know what it is. There's an average cost here, taxes, about $438 per year based on a certain assessment. But there have been other questions raised. What happens to this building? Now, we might be buying a new piece of, a new truck. But there's another question that goes with it. What does it cost to operate that asset? I've heard that we're going all electric, is what I read here. No fossil fuel at all. I don't know how you can do that in a building in Massachusetts, but that seems to be the plan. And electricity is going to go up in price, not down. So we're stuck with operating costs. We're still going to continue to operate this building. We don't know what we're going to be using it for. But we'll sell it like we sold the library for $200,000. I think people need to know what all the costs are before they vote on this. And I'll reiterate, a 2-week window between votes is a very tight window. There's an awful lot we're not hearing. We're hearing about construction costs, but taxpayers of Walpole also have operating costs to pay. And there's been no information provided on that.
So part of the MSBA's process is that they do an operating cost estimate based on the new building. They look at the operating cost of any of the buildings involved in the project, so in this case, both middle schools. And they do a projected operating cost based on the design or the design of the current schematic design in the load levels of the proposed building. So there is a proposed operating budget, and the point of that is that the MSBA wants the district to be well aware of what the new building might cost. Could be more, could be less. You know, based on, even though it's a bigger building and has more systems, it's more efficient, but it does have systems that maybe neither of the old buildings had. So they want the district and the town to be well aware of the operating costs that they're signing up for. So that was submitted as part of the package that went into the MSBA as well. So that part of the job of the finance director and working with town finance is to come up with those operating costs. So we do have those projected information, and that is being considered as part of this project. Yeah, we have, that's part of the deliverable that went into the state. That can be put up on the website. That can be presented at town meeting and just show the operating cost projections. Yep.
All right, thank you very much for coming.